This week's feature is the mouth. So we have the model, different position from last week, a little bit different lighting, so the value structure is a little bit different. But again, we're going to rely on our knowledge of Vanderpool. I recommend you put that Vanderpool book of all the mouths up here so that we can really clearly see how we should be approaching a mouth. And we'll do the mouth this week, ear next week, and then we'll cycle back through. So we'll keep doing eye, then a nose, then mouth, and then ear. And we'll get about 25 minutes on each one before advancing to working on our shadow maps of the portrait each class. So we'll start with the mouth here. Again, if just like last week, if you're not confident in your ability to gauge your proportions immediately, I would recommend a box. And for just about everybody, I'm going to recommend a box. Even those students who think they're a little more confident, I found they typically end up missing their proportions if they don't start with the box. And it ends up that you just waste an entire session because your mouth isn't quite the right proportion. So I do recommend starting with that box. In this case, going from the top of her top lip to the bottom of the cast shadow of the bottom lip, it's not quite a 1-to-2 ratio. It's 1 to maybe 1 4/5 or so. So that's about what we have here. So that's our proportional box that we're looking for. Again, I'm not going to do anchors. We don't really have enough time for that precision, but we should be able to capture some basic scheme lines of the mouth here that we can carve out. And again, even though she's a female, we do want to start with nice, crisp, straight lines, and then eventually whittle those down as we can. I am seeing the head a bit of an angle here, so we're not looking at a straight-on perspective. There is a little bit of perspective that we have to take into account. I am a little more eye level with her lips, though. So instead of 3-point perspective like we had last time with the nose, I'm dealing more with a 2-point perspective situation, if you'll recall from our lectures in Term 2. So I just have to deal with my vanishing point on each side. And in this case, we've got the mouth fading to our vanishing point here. And then the bottom side of the lip will be working up towards that vanishing point. So we are seeing a little bit of perspective there. Before I go too much further, I want to make sure that the meeting place of my top lip and my bottom lip is placed accurately. It should be a little bit above the halfway mark. So we're saying maybe about right here. Should be my top lip. Keep in mind I'm including in this box of the mouth the cast shadow underneath the bottom lip. So it's more than just the lips. Because I'm seeking out that notan. That's the most important thing in the beginning is that notan. More important than the actual features of the lips themselves. Now the top lip is not technically in shadow, but when I squint down all the way, it is a relative dark compared to some of the surrounding areas. So I am going to treat it as a dark. And then the bottom lip is going to be a light. And then I'm going to have the cast shadow underneath that bottom lip. And that cast shadow melts into the form shadow of the lip here. So as I follow that up, just working in straight lines. And then that angles up to the corner of the mouth here. So that's kind of my basic scheme of the mouth. I can check my central placement of the beak of the mouth, make sure that the distance to the corners of the mouth are correct here. So I'll do a little measurement now, corner of the mouth to the beak, and then going to the next corner of the mouth. So it should be about 1 to 1.5. So let's see, 1, yeah, not quite right. So I think my beak needs to come over just a little bit, maybe there. Yeah, that's probably accurate. And you'll recall from your anatomy lectures, hopefully, that the perspective and tilts and angles of the mouth is determined by 3 points. And those 3 points are where the beak of the top lip meets the bottom lip, and then the 2 corners of the mouth. If you get those correct in relationship to each other, it's going to reveal to you the perspective of the mouth, how much the head is turned, and where the head is tilted, up or down. So I need to be very careful to make sure I get those 3 points accurate on here. Even though I'm thinking about shadow shapes, those 3 points will help guide where I place those shadow shapes. So for example, it helped me adjust this top shadow shape. and in turn I can modify my lower shadow shape as well. I want to keep in mind that this is still just a basic scheme. I need to refine this out a little bit more before I get into shading. And I want to think about my anatomy of the lip and how the top lip sets into the bottom lip. So that beak is an indentation pointing downward, a little curvature pointing downward, and then the lower lip has some curvatures upward, where it comes in front of that top lip. So all of this subtlety will start to reveal that shape of the lips there and give it a lot more form. If you just have one line straight across, you will not have a successful mouth. It's going to look very flat, and it's not going to look like a human mouth or reveal the subtlety of the model. In this case, our model has full lips compared to some of the other models that we've seen. So we're going to see a little bit more curvature in the beak here and in those two pouches on the lower lip here. So a little more fullness there. And then this the top lip here is going to curve with a little more convexity than we typically see in the model. And come down to this corner of the mouth there. So already by going from that straight line to suggesting some of the distinction between the top and bottom lip, we're starting to get quite a bit closer in what looks like a believable mouth, even before we even shade. And so keep in mind, if your drawing is not reflecting the anatomy and proportions and a believable shape of the subject at this stage, at the shadow map stage, before you get into shading, then it is not to your advantage to move ahead to the shading, because you're just going to end up having to fix all of these shape issues later on while you've got a bunch of chalk and charcoal on your page, and it's unlikely you're going to be able to keep it as clean as you need it to be. Okay, here we go. So now we're ready to go ahead and do some shading. So I'll go ahead and with my 2B. Nothing in here is super dark. Our model has black hair, so I'm able to compare the darkness of the shadow shapes here to the darkness of her hair. And she's wearing a white shirt again, so I can conversely compare the darkness here to the white shirt and see where it falls in that value range. And it is around a mid-value, maybe a hair lighter than a mid-value for these dark shapes. And my paper is substantially lighter than a mid-value. So I can throw in some 2B here. And we'll go ahead and stump that in, and then add our white chalk on top of it. So again, we're going to treat it just like we would a Vanderpool drawing here. Everything we looked at last term. I'll have to build up some of that overlapping in the top and bottom lip again, since I lost a little bit of it with the stumping. Don't get overzealous with the creases of the lips this early on. People sometimes get really excited about putting those lines in the lip at this stage. We're still dealing with structure. Those are a more of a finishing detail, so we don't want to jump ahead too soon. And here we'll soften edges that need to be softened. Maybe a little bit softened here as it folds into the pouches of the mouth. A little bit softer over here. Overall, the top lip is generally a little bit softer of an edge quality because the values are can be quite similar to the surrounding skin. In paint, though, we have a distinct color difference between the lip and the surrounding flesh, so people sometimes interpret that as a very hard edge, whereas in drawing it's actually typically a very soft edge because the value is not as extreme. Alright, we've got our lip shadow blocked in here. Start to indicate some of the softness of the edges. closer over here. And we can start building up with our white chalk. So I have about 15 minutes that I can spend rendering this out. We'll see. I might not need to use that full time, but I'll refine it as much as we can. Again, it's a little early also to begin overlapping my my chalk and my charcoal, so I want to save that further on towards the end of the drawing. So I'll just start to lay down a little bit of white chalk here as a base and then build on top of it like we did with the nose. I still have that piece of white up there that's going to help me determine what my max light value can be, which again, I don't think is anywhere on the lips. The way the lighting is set up this week, there's still more light and a brighter light on the white shirt than on the lips. She's not wearing lip gloss in this case, so we're not expecting to have anything super, super shiny on the lips, not super highly reflective. So our highlights shouldn't be pure white on here. We need to correct this shape a little bit for the lower lip. So that basic structure should really start to reveal itself at this stage. And if it doesn't, then there's probably something critically wrong with one of your shapes or your assignment of light and dark values. So make sure you pause here for just a moment and reflect and make sure everything looks like it does up on the model before advancing to the next stage. And then we'll just go ahead and use our white chalk stump and stump this in and give us a nice base tone that we can build on top of. Keep in mind, the more you stump something, the more it's going to approach a mid-value, or in this case, the tone of the paper. So if I have white chalk on here, the more I stump the white chalk, the more it's going to come off and go darker and darker until it reaches more of the gray of the paper. The more I stump dark charcoal, the more it's going to come off until it gets closer and closer to the mid-value of the paper. It's just like when we're stumping on white paper, the more you stump it, the more it all approaches just this general mid-value. So if I need more of this to come off to give myself a slightly darker base for the lights, I just stump it a little more. And then it's a little bit darker base, and then I can build on top of it with strokes. So I'll use that to my advantage if, for example, I want to be building up more with the white chalk to show more of the anatomy here. So in this case, I'm going to start here with the philtrum. Follow the roundness in the philtrum, the highlights here. Flowing around the mouth, around the lips. Then start to indicate some of the fullness of the lips here. There's some highlights in here. I would prefer the those little dark lines that are on the lips, following the form of lips. I would prefer those be indicated with the tone of the paper. I only want to throw in dark lines at the very end with charcoal if I absolutely have to. But remember, I'm going to follow either with the form here, like this, showing that roundness of the lips, or I'm going to go across the form. So both of those are going to start to suggest the anatomy. So even with the chin, across and with the form. Just have to imagine lines flowing over. And eventually as we build these up, it's going to start to look more like pores of skin, or in this case, kind of like the wrinkles, the small little creases in the mouth. Alright. So again, with and across the form there. So that's a good indication. I'm going to switch back to my dark pencil because now I'll be able to go back and address some of the overlapping forms of the top lip and the bottom lip. So I'm grabbing my HB and my 2B here and build up some of the dark values. So my 2B I'm using to adjust more of the shape, reestablishing some of the shape here of the lips and getting some of the values in there that I need, that I may have lost with the stumping. And then the HB I'll come back in to clean up with and then get any hard edges that I need as well. Once again, we've talked about it before, but your shadow side, in this case the dark of the lips here, should not have a lot of noticeable direction of the strokes. It should mostly just kind of melt away into the noise of the shadow. We want our visible strokes to be on the light side so that the lights are sculptural and stand out, and all of the darks recede back. Very subtle value difference between the lip here and the actual skin underneath it, and really it's because there's a hair of reflected light below the lips where that plane is turned down. It's bouncing off the chin and bouncing back up. But instead of erasing that reflected light out, I'm just going to build up some of the values of that lip to be a little bit darker and a little bit richer along that terminator there. And then the light of the reflected light will pop out on its own. It's not something I'm going to have to struggle to erase out. And as I start to put in this core shadow along the lip here and along the upper lip up here, it's going to start to look more and more round. Again, the more we push the core shadow like we learned in term 2, the more round something's going to look. So if I want these lips to look more full, especially this lower lip here where there's a distinct terminator between light and dark, then I just push the core shadow. I deepen it a little more and it'll make those lips look rounder and more full. There is an extreme though that I can push it. You know, if I go too dark, it's just going to look like a black line across her, so across her mouth. So I need to make sure I don't go too crazy there. But I can definitely exaggerate it just a little bit to start to suggest some of that fullness. One of the common mistakes students make is to not put any value variety in there or variation in the shadow side and keep it flat black. While it is good to do most of your modeling in the lights, you do need to have some variation in the darks, especially in the case of this lip where it's this top lip where it's kind of ambiguous, it's dancing around a mid value. If I just leave that top lip one value, it's going to read really flat and have no form. So I need to make sure that even though I decided in the beginning that I was going to lump it with the shadow side, that I'm going to include enough value variation to describe the fullness of the lip here and the fullness of the lip here and the meeting at the crease in the middle going down into the beak. That occlusion there is going to be the darkest area in the mouth. A common tendency that, or mistake that some beginner painters have is to paint that black. It's definitely not a black line. And so I'm not going to take my 6B and really crank it in, but it is a very dark line. Often it's going to be indicated in the painting with a dark, rich, usually red color like alizarin there, but you never want to make it just a flat black. There is some color in there because a lot of light is passing through the lips and bouncing off the lips and getting up into that occlusion. So even though it's an occlusion, and occlusions are very dark, like we talked about, probably the darkest shadows we have, it doesn't mean it's necessarily pure black. So we've got about 5 minutes left of this drawing. So at this point we can actually begin to start, where applicable, interlacing some of the charcoal and the white chalk. Again, we have to remember, like last time, that if we make a mistake here and you erase it, you're going to smudge that white chalk and the charcoal, and you're going to end up having to erase all the way back down to the paper and reestablish all those values. So we need to be very, very careful. We never want to smudge the white chalk and the charcoal together. We can overlap them to a certain amount to help integrate them, sort of knit the dark shapes into the light shapes, and allow some of that gray to show through underneath that knitting. But we never want to just smudge them together. And again, the same will be true with painting. You can, if this was a dark brush, I could take that dark brush and make a stroke over into the light. And that's just to knit the dark shape and the light shape together. But I would never take a soft brush and soften the dark shapes into the light shapes. I would just muddy up my color. So just now, just like in painting, I would have to be very, very careful to make sure I really want to do that. Because if it was paint and I made a mistake, then it's a lot more work to try and fix that than if I had just slowly approached it in the beginning. Little bits of value here and there. So we're just doing our fine-tune measurement. And keep a fine-tuned value placement, but keep in mind if our shape is not correct, if we're not accurately describing the perspective of the mouth and the tilts of the mouth at this stage, then all of the little fine-tuning in the world is not going to help it. We should be able to stop our drawing at just about any point and have it look accurate. It's just the level of refinement that might change. I want to come back in here and make sure I have, do some edge maintenance. This occlusion where the lips meet, it should be softer on the top where it melts into that top lip, and then a little crisper on the bottom because it is a tiny little cast shadow down there. So we need to make sure that it's softer on the top of that dark and then sharper on the bottom. A little more firm with some of these highlights on the lip. Keep in mind with highlights, you need to make sure your edges are a little sharper than just center lights, like we see here with the chin and with the philtrum. And that's what will make them look like highlights as opposed to just some of the regular modeling of the form. And if you have some time, you can go ahead and suggest some of the small, delicate indentations around the edges of the mouth. Just don't go too crazy with them. A lot of times people will sink this line here really, really dark, and it ends up being very, very unflattering, but we're talking about something that's maybe half of a value step or less. So it needs to definitely be very, very subtle as you build up that information. All right, and we'll stop there.